Hi guys, welcome back or welcome to DreamWorks Switch to Life. And for today's video, we are going to be reviewing DreamWorks' second movie ever because it recently just turned 25 years old on Monday. That of course being The Prince of Egypt, which is really great if you ask me. It has a lot of great things going for it. Great animation, great voice acting. One of the best parts is its music. Seriously, this movie won an Oscar for having the best original song. I think it's also the best adaptation of the story from the Bible, which, if you don't know, is basically about how Moses was sent into the river as a baby, and when he grew up, he left Egypt, discovered God, and decided to come back to free his fellow Israelites, or I guess Hebrew slaves, from Egypt. And it's really amazing, all of the miracles that are performed in that story, and I felt like this movie is the best adaptation by far of the original Bible. Now, again, everyone is subject to their own opinions, but that's mine. This is my favorite version of the story of Moses. This was actually a really great and amazing movie. I might even argue that it's perfect at what it does. Maybe it's just a little bit aged, but to be honest, this was groundbreaking animation at the time that it was being made. And this was only DreamWorks' second movie. That's really cool and amazing. Now, I would give a spoiler warning, but for one thing, this movie is over 25 years old now, and for another, the story is over 3,000 years old. So, yeah, no spoiler warning. We're just gonna go right into it. So the movie starts with a bunch of Hebrew children being killed, and to protect her son, Moses, Yocheved ends up sending her son into the river and hoping that somehow he will manage to escape. He ends up right into the palace quarters of the Egyptian queen, and she ends up adopting him and raising him alongside her own son, Ramesses II, and she's married to the current pharaoh, Ramesses I, who was cruel and the person who actually ordered the execution of all of the slaves. Years pass, and Moses and Ramesses have grown up, and now they're actually destined to take over, or rather, Ramesses is destined to become pharaoh, while Moses is supposed to be there to help him, because Moses, being the second born, technically, is not in line for the throne. Moses is gifted a delicate desert flower who he takes pity on and helps escape, though discreetly about it, and in the process he ends up running into his older sister and brother, Aaron and Miriam. Miriam reveals the truth that Moses was actually adopted and he was born a Hebrew slave and was simply gifted all of the wealth and power that he has. After learning that, Moses actually looks around at the devastation that Egypt is causing to all of the Hebrew slaves and realizes that he can't stay there, especially after taking pity on one slave being whipped and killing a guard to save the slave. Moses ends up traveling to a new place where he ends up marrying Zipporah after being reunited with her. And then there's a scene where he actually discovers a flaming bush, which is actually God trying to speak to Moses and telling him that he needs to go back to Egypt to free all of the Hebrew slaves. And what's amazing about this story is that even though Moses considers himself unworthy, he's just one man, it's that with God on your side, anything is possible, even if you're just a one-man army. And that is an amazing story to be told in this movie. But however, the story is also about freedom and about sacrifice. Moses is sacrificing so much. He has a good life, but despite that, he goes back into Egypt and fights against his own brother, Ramesses, which I gotta say is probably the best part. The emotional drama between these two brothers fighting on different sides, well, not necessarily fighting, but showing just how stubborn Ramesses can be and how Moses is trying to do the will of God can be pretty stubborn too, and it's so great to see all of the emotional tension with these two unfold. This emotional tension is actually the reason why I think this movie is the best. That and the music, the stunning animation, I mean seriously, these painted backgrounds are so amazing. It's awesome. Then there's a series of plagues, which ends up ending with the final plague, the angel of death, which kills the firstborn of every single Egyptian, including Pharaoh's own son. And Ramesses II is forced to acknowledge the fact that he has to let the Israelites go. So he does. But then, of course, his emotions get the better of him, and he decides to take revenge on the Israelites. And while they're running away, they end up coming to the Red Sea, and the only way to get across is to part the Red Sea, which actually leads to one of the most stunning animated sequences of all time, and probably the best sequence of the Red Sea being parted ever. I mean, I don't know. There's definitely a lot, and they're all good, but this one was probably the most beautiful. I just gotta say that. And eventually, the seas part and the Israelites cross through, and the Egyptians are drowned when the seas unpart, coming back together, and the Israelites are finally free to go to the promised land. And the movie ends with Moses getting the 10 commandments. It doesn't go into detail about that, it just shows it. So the story is iconic and almost everybody knows it, so I get it if you guys don't watch this movie, but I highly recommend you do. If not for the story or the emotional characters, you have to watch it for the music, because the music in this movie is simply amazing. It's just so good. I honestly cannot believe that this is not a Disney film, but it makes sense. This film was actually pitched to Disney, and Disney turned it down because it was based off of a Bible. And with that in mind, that meant that this was one of the first films pitched to a brand new animation studio, DreamWorks, and they made it. It's amazing. And I bet Disney is regretting the fact that they didn't create this. Now, I will admit this movie does have its problems, not necessarily with the story. I felt it was perfect with the story. The emotions, characters, music, everything about it was great. The one thing that I would say was problems was the occasional animation error, but the animation of this movie is just so good, so beautiful. This movie is perfect in almost every single way, and if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you do. But for those of you who have seen it, what are your thoughts and opinions? Make sure that you leave your comments down below. If you haven't already, make sure that you subscribe so you can keep up to date on all things DreamWorks. But most importantly, make sure that you're staying safe out there, and I will see you all in my next video. But until then, bye-bye.
Tell me this, Moses, tell me this. Why is it that every time you start something, I'm the one who ends up in trouble?
It's Ramesses. You're in trouble, young man.
Get down here.
You might as well.
We're gonna tell the Pharaoh.